Hi, I'm Jared Lombardo, and welcome to Episode 1 of the Conventional Podcast. In this episode, I have an interview with one of the managers of some of the biggest gaming festivals around. I've worked with her for the last 12 years, and I've learned a lot from and with her in that time. Kristin Lindsay, welcome to the show.
I'm Kristin Lindsay, and I've been doing the staff management for PAX since the beginning. So our first show was in 2004 in Seattle, and now we have shows in Seattle, in Boston, San Antonio, Pittsburgh, and Melbourne, Australia. So we stretch the globe now, and I'm still doing the staff management.
Yeah. So how did you get into conventions and event management in the first place?
Totally by accident, which is, I think, how a lot of people end up in this space. Basically, the story of Penny Arcade founding PAX was the founders of the show and the people behind the strip, Mike and Jerry, or better known as Gabe and Tycho from Penny Arcade, the webcomic, had been attending E3 for a number of years and absolutely loved it, but wished that it could be something that the average consumer could go to, because E3 historically has been a media show, more like a trade show than a consumer show. And they wanted to do something that was like that, but that was open to everybody, and maybe we could play some games and have a lot of fun and see some new cool stuff. So they pitched the idea to their business manager, Robert, and said, hey, let's do something like that. You figure it out. And he was like, okay. And he reached towards the fan community from the webcomic and said, hey, is anyone interested in helping out with this? And at that time, it just happened to be really... it worked out for me. I had just had a baby a couple of years before that. I hadn't gone back to work because I was still on maternity leave, and I was, to be pretty honest, kind of bored, looking for something to do, looking for people to interact with, because I'd been missing that social element as a stay-at-home mom. And it just worked out really well. I was really involved with my online fandom with Penny Arcade, but had no social connections outside of that. So I was like, yeah, I totally want to help and actually get to interact with real people, and it will be really fun. So I came on board to help with that, and was recruiting other people from the fan communities to come volunteer for the show. And basically, I've been doing that ever since.
So it was just a general open call at the beginning, and then you just fell into the management role?
Yeah, so not exactly. I was one of the administrators of the forum, one of the fan forums. So we were already... I guess sort of, I don't want to say at a high level, but we were administering one of the fan forums. And I had been helping with a show actually here in Vancouver in 2003 and 2002 called Necrowambicon, which was a Penny Arcade meetup, essentially, a LAN local here. And they had been coming up to that for a couple of years. So they were familiar with us in that sort of event space already from this fairly small LAN that we had been doing. So they turned to Necrowambicon, which was supported by this fan community. And Necrowambicon kind of became one of the inspirations, or very early inspirations, for PAX.
So it's been, like 13 years?
Basically, yeah.
And, what keeps you going in all that time? Things have grown and changed so much.
I'm so lucky because I love my job, and I loved it from day one, and I still love it today. And it's been a very... we jumped in the deep end, absolutely. I had no event production experience. I had never wrangled show crew before. I'd never done anything like that. But the first show, we had 40 volunteers, which we thought would be plenty, and we ended up with over 3,000 attendees. So it was pretty hairy that first year. We were running 24 hours a day as well from a Friday to Sunday show. And I just we're very naive going into it, thinking that, there will be downtime, there will be breaks, we'll kind of trade off the four organizers. And no, that didn't end up happening. But we learned a lot of lessons that first year. And certainly one of them was not, A, don't run a 24-hour-a-day show, and B, we're going to need more people. So once we had a couple of shows, though, a couple of years under our belts, the learning curve has been really gentle to me. And we've obviously, PAX is so huge now, and our show crews can be in excess of 1,000 people. But it's also been, 15 years of me doing it. And even though I started with 40 and now I'm dealing with like 1,000 per show, but it's been a nice slope going up there. So I learn something new with every show, and then I can apply that to the next one.
Well, can you give some examples of some of what those specific learnings over the years were?
Communication skills, largely. Just starting out from being somebody who didn't have a lot of social interaction in my life to having to interact with people on a pretty much constant basis. So listening skills, talking to people, finding out what people's interests were. For me, that's probably the most important aspect of, we call our shows crew enforcers. So for every enforcer, there's sort of an ideal department or an ideal task that they could be doing. They may not even know exactly what it is. I certainly don't know exactly what it is when I first meet them. So it's going to take a little digging. It's going to take a little conversation. It's going to take a little investigation to find out what their interests are, and then for me to try and think, okay, what do we have that's available that might intersect with what their interests are. So it's a lot of listening skills, basically. I didn't have any school training for this. I went to theater school, so my background certainly wasn't in anything like this. And that I was sort of a knock on wood, fly by the seat of my pants situation up until we expanded into Australia. And at that time, that was our third show, I believe. And it was becoming a kind of a round the year, 12 months a year job. And I went to Robert, my boss at the time, and I said, we've been really kind of lucky that this has worked out. I don't have any real training in this area, and I probably should if we're going to be doing this around the calendar year. And he said, yeah, sure, look around, see what, if you want to go back to school for some training, we can totally do that. And I did. I went to school and got an associate's degree in leadership and conflict resolution. So that was a big help for me as well, just in learning to manage people and again, with those listening skills and communication skills. So that was something that really helped as we did more and more shows a year.
So how did you find a program like that when you were searching for that associate's
Google.
degree?
Yeah, I got lucky in that actually I happen to live in the same city as our provincial police academy here. And they have several schools there that do. They have a school of mediation and a school of leadership, and they run a joint program, which is this leadership and conflict resolution program. And they do take civilian students. So I was actually the only civilian student in my class, but they do actually allow you to go to school at police academy just as somebody off the street, as long as you pay the tuition. And they just happened because I was basically like, well, I need a leadership program, and I kind of just Googled leadership programs, and it came up. So I did a 2-year program there.
That's really cool. Pretty much nobody I've talked to so far has gone an academic route to enhance their skills in the interviews so far, but everybody has just like, well, I loved a thing, and then I fell into the event running.
Yeah, well, that is absolutely how I started, and I mean, we're talking like I went to school. It was like 2012 when I finished, so. I managed to just sort of wing it from 2004 until 2010. So 6 years of, and we were successful. It worked out. We've got a really great team at Penny Arcade, and now we work with Reed Pop, and we've got a really, really strong team. But I just was starting to feel like it was inevitable that I was going to need some actual training. We were expanding so fast, and I just needed that security of a education behind me to really be comfortable in my job and what I was doing.
So that study was in conflict resolution as part of it, leadership and conflict resolution. And having been an enforcer, I've seen internal things, and there have at times been like internal politics and other issues. Can you talk about some of the big challenges you've had in that space, possibly code of conduct related or discipline? Just some of the things that other people could learn from to make their own shows better.
Yeah, absolutely. It's when we're dealing with a show crew pool as large as we have, because remember we have now we've got 5 shows, and each show has some staff that's just unique to that show. So we're dealing with a standing group of nearly 4,000 people who are all part of this, an online forum and community. So you can't have that many people together in one online space without there being conflicts of some kind. I was aware of that, and I think anyone who's an enforcer is aware of that. Of course, there's going to be conflict. For me, a good example, and this is something that was really apparent when I started to go to school for it, is I'm not going to name any names, but there was a department manager specifically who had a communication style which definitely conflicted with mine, or management style, I should say. And up until a certain point, I just felt like we were always butting heads, and we were never really seeing eye to eye on things, and I had a lot of frustration over that. But he was really good at what he was doing, so I just always sort of was grumbling about it in the back of my mind. And it wasn't until I went to school and learned, there are different styles of management, and some of them don't some of them don't mesh very well. And I'd never sort of thought about it like that. I'd always just sort of thought, well, we're all people and we should be able to communicate together. But never before had it been sort of really, clearly laid out. There are different ways to do this, and that's okay. And you just have to communicate with each other. And here are some ways that you can communicate, and how you can be a better listener, and how you can take on board the types of things that he's doing and the reasons why he's doing them. And that was a very eye-opening experience for me, because it was absolutely all personal. It was me realizing that I'd become very defensive when I was dealing with him. I had put up barriers. I wasn't listening very clearly to what he was saying, just because we had this ongoing tension. So when I finally thought, he actually does a really good job, and I knew that. I knew that he did a really good job. I just thought, well, personally we don't get along, but it actually wasn't about that at all. It was just about his personal management style, which worked for him. And once I put down those barriers and was listening to him a little more honestly, our relationship problems just sort of evaporated, and it worked out really well. So that was a good growing experience for me, realizing that not everyone was going to do the things the same way that I would have intuitively or naturally or whatever. And that was okay. We could be harmonious together with different management styles. In terms of things like code of conduct or disciplinary actions, I mean, of course, sure, there have been over the years a number of times where we've had to ask somebody to leave the community, and sometimes those circumstances were more urgent than other. But honestly, it doesn't happen as often as I think it could. Enforcers are, in general, I feel so lucky to work with them. We really are they really are a really good group of people, and with a handful of exceptions, people are willing to work together. And I'm sure that there are incidents that don't get escalated up to my level, and that there's always going to be low level spats or whatever between people. But in terms of things that have had to be were so large that I had to step in and act on them, a lot fewer than I think a community of 4,000 people would indicate just by numbers. So we're really lucky. We do have a code of conduct. We did have to generate some documentation, which we were able to do with the help of a bunch of community members, and we had some legal input as well. Because again, particularly now, I mean, enforcers are paid staff. And that's something that I think that it's important to mention right off the bat, because not all event staff and convention staff are. Enforcers are paid staff, so there's a code of conduct that comes along with being an employee, and there's a couple of times that they're asked to sign, some kind of pledge that says they will abide by a contract of some kinds, obviously. So we have a couple of different times that's required. One is during the actual hiring process, the HR paperwork. They sign a set of, I think that they're called rules and regulations, if I remember correctly. But it's basically stuff like, you're going to wear your uniform, and you're, going to do the tasks as instructed on these dates. It's a fairly straightforward employment contract that the HR payroll contractor we use has put together for us. And then we have ones that have to do with the community directly. One of them is the safety circle, which is not so much a policy, but a process that we have for conflict resolution, specifically in regards to harassment complaints. So we have, a code of conduct that people are asked to adhere to, and then we have a remediation process if that doesn't work out. So we're covered on a number of levels. But again, these are things that have taken us a number of years to develop and refine and put into place.
So when PAX started, the enforcers were volunteers.
Yes.
Can you talk about how that transition was affected, but also like what motivated the need?
Sure. I back in the early days, there was always the question of like, how do we compensate people, and how do we thank them? Because working for a convention is no small feat. A lot of work goes into it, a lot of pain, a lot of sweat in a very short period of time, and it's hard on anybody, no matter what level you're at, whether you're just like your general show crew up to the higher management levels. So the question was always like, how do we compensate people? And originally we had a system where we would reimburse a night of hotel rooms, and we had these, we can pay for snack food and we can pay for their hotels, but that wasn't covering everybody, because a lot of people would do room shares, and only the person who had paid for the hotel room would end up getting compensated, and people who were rooming with them would end up with nothing. So it was never perfect. We talked about it a lot internally, which is like, okay, well, how can we more fairly compensate people? which is a silly question, right? The answer is we'll pay them, right? That's logically the answer is pay people. So we tried a couple of different systems, and eventually we were just like, what are we doing? We're making all of this extra work for ourselves, trying to reinvent the compensation wheel when the answer is really just pay them. So that's what happened. And I can't remember what year exactly that was, 2011, maybe I think it was in 2011. Where ultimately we were like, okay, our show crews are numbering 700 people. It's just too crazy to try and figure out some other system. We'll bring in a payroll contractor and we'll pay people honestly and deservedly, and we've been doing that since. It's certainly a lot of extra work for everybody in terms of paperwork and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's fair, and I mean it seems to be working out. So.
In addition to the compensation fairness, though, isn't there also sort of an insurance advantage? Because insurance can be a big problem for a lot of shows, like having the right coverage for the volunteer staff.
Yeah.
And so if they're employees, they're covered differently. Does that help in the business side?
So I'm not 100% sure of all of the details of this, but I mean a show like PAX is insured for everybody who attends, whether they're an attendee or an exhibitor or a staff member or whatever. The show carries insurance in the event of various certain things that happen. There's an added level of course, it becomes like a workers' compensation issue if they're actually paid employees. Technically, we're not the employer. They're subcontracted through United Temp Agency. So those sorts of claims go through United rather than us. So it does give us an added level of protection, but everybody's already protected anyway, just as someone coming to the show. I don't want to say attendee because that implies that they're not working there. But once you come into the building and you are there for PAX, you are therefore covered under the show's insurance for all these various things that could happen.
Okay, thank you for that, because there's always been to some extent in the enforcer community, from my experience, and then also among the wider PAX attendee community, there's been a misunderstanding that the paid employee thing was primarily for insurance purposes.
Definitely not.
Okay,
no, it's. I mean, primarily it's to be compensated.
Yeah, that's great. And being fair and even to everybody is a great policy, and a lot of shows have a hard time with finding a good balance of that. So
there are a lot of different ways to approach it. I mean, I know that I'm familiar with shows that have registered as nonprofits, because then of course they can have people volunteer, and it doesn't become an issue. But when I'll be honest, we're huge shows, and we employ, whether that's in quotes or whether that's not in quotes, a lot of people. IRS is going to want a piece of that. Like we open ourselves to some incredibly dubious business practices if we're not paying our staff, and that's the reality. A lot of the man hours for a PAX, depending if it's a 3-day or a 4-day show, they're in the tens of thousands. At the end of every show, I total up the man hours, and we're looking at 15 to 18,000 man hours for one weekend. That's a lot of people. I shouldn't use the word man hours. I apologize. Labor hours. So it's that's a lot of potential income basically that the government wants to see fairly paid out and fairly taxed, and that's not unreasonable.
Yeah, it's not unreasonable at all. Yeah, from my experience, there aren't really many other shows that do it this way, but most of the shows I've had direct experience with are nonprofits.
Right, well, and that's the thing, right? Like that's the easy, and I don't want to say the easy answer. It's certainly not an easy answer, but it's a cultural thing, I think, in some cases. A lot of Comic-Cons, they sort of have a nonprofit a platform in a lot of ways. It's a preservation of culture, and they're talking about they are legitimate nonprofits. They're trying to preserve. It's an art and culture issue, so they can say we're here to preserve this particular form of Americana or whatever, and people can be on board with that and want to volunteer for those purposes. But at PAX, we're not going to say we're a nonprofit dedicated to having a really cool time, right? Like it sort of doesn't fly, in my opinion. We're a nonprofit that is here to preserve the coolness of hanging out and playing board games for a weekend. It's a little dodgy, I think, from a moral standpoint. So, no, we're not.
Yeah.
We're not on some great crusade to preserve the artistic merits of playing video games. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know. It's certainly not the main part of what we're doing. We're honestly just there to have a big gaming festival. So people who work their heart and soul for that, they deserve to get paid.
Yeah, no, that's great. One thing that that I've seen draw people to enforce, and also draws people to work at other conventions is the community that they can build with their peers, and then participating back into the fan community that it's part of. In addition to those things, or if you want to go into detail on some of those things, what are some of the things you do to attract new staff, attract and retain staff?
That's a good question. People come to enforcing for a lot of different reasons. Community is one of the biggest ones. I mean, it's the reason why I ended up here ultimately. I was at home, I was interacting with people a lot online, but I was missing the actual physical, personal connection. And that's what ultimately led me down this path. So I think a lot of people come to enforcing looking for friends, looking for a way to experience a PAX, but not be alone in a bubble. I've talked to enforcers who have told me that they were introverts, were very shy, and they actually did enforcing as something, a conscious decision to combat that. I'm going to put myself out there via joining a big community and doing this huge, big, kind of scary social event, but having it with a kind of a family behind my back and knowing that I would have this built-in community support. Because if you just buy a ticket and go to a PAX, you don't really know anybody there. There's still that welcome home aspect because it's all the cool stuff that everybody has in common, but that doesn't automatically make friends with everybody else. Coming into it as an enforcer means you're already going to know some names, you're already going to know some people, you have a department that you kind of belong to, and it's like going into a PAX with a built-in family. So that is definitely very appealing, and we like to try and preserve that as much as possible. The biggest thing that we've done is to allow the enforcer community to stay whole year round. We run a forum that everybody retains their membership to, and there's Facebook groups, there's Slack groups, there's all kinds of various groups that run year round. We do a summer barbecue in Seattle. We although we just recently changed, we used to do SACs, which were the bag stuffing parties that we had previous to each show, where people could come and meet other enforcers and have some pizza and just sort of, while they would be stuffing the bags, they would also be able to have conversations and make some friends as well. So we try to support those connections and the opportunity to make those connections outside of just strictly the week that we're putting on a PAX. Yeah, so just basically encouraging that and allowing a platform for that, running the forum and making sure that we step in whenever things are going a little off the rails, using those remediation processes we talked about earlier, and just giving people an opportunity to have an online community outside of the actual running of the event.
So the community is the primary form of retention also, or are there...
I think so. I think, when people talk about being an enforcer and what that means to them, it almost always is wrapped up somehow in the idea of community or family. I would say it's sort of our number one appealing, thing that appeals. We're not paying a huge amount of money. People don't come to it and be rich at the end of the weekend. They're still going to walk away by the time they've paid for their hotel and they've paid for their food. They're not going to come out ahead. Like it's, they're not coming to it for the money. I don't think that they're coming to it for the free ticket. Really, I think people are really there to make friends and to get to know people, and then that takes different shapes as well. I know that some people are looking for ways to get into the industry. It might be that I want to work in video games or tabletop games or whatever, and this seems like a good entry to that, and that's certainly true. There are lots of enforcers who have gone on to work for developers or other ancillary industries to the computer games business, and it's definitely a way to get to know people, whether that's the enforcer that you're going to call friend for the rest of your life, or whether it's the company that you helped their booth so they really like your style and hire you on. I mean, we've seen those things happen. So, but that really has to do with making connections and forming communities.
Along those lines, though, there's some internal policies about not going too far in that respect. And I've seen that at other shows, too, where sometimes staff people can feel entitled and start begging things from exhibitors. Right. What kind of stuff have you done to combat that?
Of course, and that's one of our rules. When you're working as an enforcer, you're not allowed to basically ask for swag, I think is the phrase as it appears in the guidelines. But it has to sort of always be on the human level. So You can't sort of bully your way into the booth and say, hey, I'm here in my shirt of whichever show color it is. I want you to give me stuff. On the rare occasion that we hear that happening, yeah, we absolutely crack down on it. And you'll see sometimes messages go out during a show if we've had a few reports. If there's someone we need to go speak to or pull off the show floor or something like that, we're certainly going to do it. That tarnishes the reputation of all enforcers, and we don't want exhibitors to see us in those roles. Again, it doesn't happen very often, but it's more along the lines of they might have someone helping out with their booth in a very honest way. It's just, and they just really like how hardworking that person is, or they like their personality, or they think, wow, enforcers are really great. I would hire this guy in a minute, and, and a few months down the road, they do. It's not usually, it doesn't happen on the show floor, right? It's very easy to it's very quick and easy to make a bad impression. It's a lot more difficult to make a good impression, I think, as an enforcer. You've got to really work hard.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. How do you have the community attracting people, but every show seems to always have a hard time. Like, there's never enough people, and in the case of the enforcers, there's often an extra call. But how do you make that effective? How do you get new blood into the system to help run the show every 4 times a year?
It's a great
5
question.
times a year.
So with the 5 shows that we're running right now, Seattle and Boston are our oldest, and we don't have trouble staffing those shows. The shows are sufficiently entrenched within the game communities of Seattle and Boston, and we have so many veterans who come back. The minimum age to be an enforcer is 18, so there's always sort of someone right on the edge of that. Oh, I'll be 18 next year. I'm really looking forward to volunteering. So we sort of get new blood that way just by age, the aging of the population. So staffing levels in those cities aren't an issue. But in the cities where we have newer shows, and San Antonio is the number one that I sort of struggle with now. We've only been there for a couple of years. The show is not super well known there. There are a lot of interesting issues that are unique to San Antonio that, in terms of staffing a show, that we weren't familiar with when we first moved in there. There are a lot of added hurdles sometimes that we don't expect. So it's a little more difficult to build up that base, that solid base like we have in Seattle and Boston. I'm confident that it will get there as the show grows. The people who want to be enforcers grow. A lot of enforcers are PAX attendees who go to the show a couple of years and decide, hey, now it's my turn to give back. I hear that phrase a lot, wanting to give back. So once we've been there 4 or 5 years is when we start to have people say, yeah, I've done it a few years now, and it's now my turn to give back. So they're sort of self-resolving problems over a longer term. But certainly in the first few years of a show, it's more difficult. Then I have to do things like ask volunteers, or ask enforcers rather, to put in double shifts or to work longer hours maybe. And with a new show, I often push my recruiting deadline a lot later than normally I would. Like, I might be hiring new people less than a month before the show, which is normally something that makes me really uncomfortable. But if we just don't, if we don't have what I consider to be comfortable numbers, we're going to push that window as late as we can. So those are the types of ways that I try to solve those problems. But in the longer term, I know that they will resolve eventually as the show becomes more entrenched in the community.
So just sort of the organic process of waiting and putting on a good show,
right?
Exactly,
and that's key. And putting on the good show is a big part of it. Obviously, if people aren't having a great time, they're not going to develop that I want to give back mindset, right? When show is over and we pack up and leave, the people in the community still think about it. They're going to go to their local game store and they're going to mention it. They're going to go to their game nights and they're going to mention it. The word continues to spread even after we've packed up and left town. So every year there's a few more people who come back in. Oh, I didn't go last year, but a friend of mine did, and they said it was really cool. And now we're thinking about maybe working there. And it is very much an organic process, and we just have to give it space and time.
So among the putting on a good show sort of things, what are some of your favorite events that have occurred in all these 40 shows or whatever in the last 15 years?
Staff related or
staff or attending?
There's so much cool stuff that happens at a PAX. I really love it. One of the things I like that's specific to the staffing is our enforcer land, our enforcer welfare department, which was sort of, I'm sure every convention has a break room for their staff, where they can go and they can, chill. But I think that we've taken it kind of to the next level because we have an entire staff dedicated to the welfare of our employees. And in addition to a break room, they do a lot of kind of fun, morale-boosting sort of activities. They have a quiet area. They often have massage therapists on staff who can provide a little support. It's definitely more than just go here to pick up some granola bars. They definitely mother us really well, and they're there for both emotional and physical needs. And I'm really proud of our enforcer welfare department and our enforcer land staff. They've been really great throughout the years. I like our line entertainment department a lot, and that was something that was completely, sort of an enforcer idea. Every show that deals with lines has staff dedicated to dealing with those lines, so our line management staff is a necessity. But a few years in, someone came up to us and said, hey, we've got all of these attendees standing around in lines. They're sort of a captive audience. We could dedicate some staff to trying to make them have fun while they're in the line. And we said, yeah, sure, that sounds like an interesting experiment. Let's do it. And gave them a small budget that they could use to make some prizes or, to procure some prizes and to put together some games. And now we have these roving teams of line entertainers, and they're our most outgoing enforcers. It's a great job for people who are really outgoing and love to meet new people. And lots of theater students, lots of musicians end up in the line management department. And we have one-man bands, and we have little performance troops, and they run all over the place in wacky costumes, carrying a multitude of prizes and games, and they interact with people in the lines who are feeling like they want to do so, right? Like, obviously, if you just want to stand in a line and be chill and not have anyone talk to you, that's certainly possible. But a lot of people are like, yeah, hey, I'm stuck here, and this panel's not going to open for another half hour. What have you got? Like, entertain me. And that's what they're there for. So I really love that. I think that's something that makes PAX unique, that we have these great outgoing team members who are there to try and make sure everybody's having a good time, even when they're doing something that doesn't sound like a good time. So I'm proud of that. What else? We've been working, kind of a newer development is the PAX Arcadia, which used to be PAX XP, where we do stuff that's it's like digital integration of codes on the back of people's passes. And it started out sort of as kind of like a scavenger hunt. You would go around and scan QR codes that would be hidden around the show, ultimately with the goal of, it was kind of like a digital puzzle. You would put puzzle pieces together on your phone, and then once you had gone to all of the various hidden locations of these codes to scan, you'd go to the info desk and show them the completed picture, and you would get a prize. And it was just like a small little thing that ultimately, originally was designed just to get people familiar with the different venues and locations, to get them to move around and say, oh, this is where the theater is. Oh, this is where this department is, just to sort of familiarize them with the venue. But now it's been kicked up to a whole new level. Now it's got these prize kiosks, and they do it's a whole story, basically, like you fight monsters, all in a digital story that you're reading off of your phone as you're scanning QR codes around the building, and it's pretty neat. The Read Pop people have really helped us kick that up a whole nother level, and when you register your badge, you just get entered into this wild adventure that you could take part in, and it's pretty cool. I like that a lot, and they're still working on it, and they're still developing it, and I'm curious to see how it ends up, because I really like those things. Have you ever gone to White Wolf Lodge, or I think they have one in Disneyland too, where you go to certain locations and you it's a RFID thing, and you can wave a wand or something like that, and it tells you a little story.
I know of things like that, but I haven't.
It's basically like that, except people are using their badges, right, instead of a RFID wand or whatever. But but it's following a story. Like, you're gonna go out questing with your badge, and it tells a little story, and you defeat the monster, and then you get a prize at the end of it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's great. I saw those at PAX South this past 2 months ago, 3 months ago, whenever that was, in the recent, and but I hadn't I was busy with my enforcer job or visiting with friends. And
and it's cool. Like anyone,
myself,
you can do it with any badge. You can have an enforcer badge and do it, or you can, have an attendee badge or an exhibitor badge or whatever. It's not limited to just the attendees. The enforcers can definitely take parts in them too. And I mean, originally back when it was PAX XP, it was super simple. It was literally just a sticker with a QR code on a sign somewhere. But now there are these little kiosks. Right now, you scan your badge and it tells you if you've won something or if you've defeated the dragon or whatever, whatever the quest thing is at that stage. So it's still pretty cool, but it's definitely something that's grown over the years and I think is kind of exciting. And it does also get you going around the show to see things, which when you're in, some of our shows like East and South, they're all within one building, because those convention centers are really great spaces to work in from an event production standpoint. Some of our locations are not so great to work in. Like in Seattle, we're really tight for space, and the Washington State Convention Center is kind of a bit of a nightmare of a building for a show our size. So we have to, we'll end up with 8 satellite locations, where we're down at the Benaroya Hall, which is 8 blocks away, and we're over at the Westin, which is 10 blocks away, and we're kind of spread out over the downtown core of Seattle. So it can be hard to figure out where you're going, and well, maybe I don't actually want to go over to the Westin, but then if you're like, okay, well, I'm going to take a little 10-minute walk, and I'll walk down to the Westin, or I'll take the shuttle and I'll see what's there. And once you get there to scan your badge, you realize, oh, this is where all the autograph panels are, and this is where this thing is, and it's a good way to just get people moving around the different venues of the show to see what's going on.
So a few times you've brought up the partnership with Reed Pop. Mm-hmm. I know that when PAX started, it was just run by Penny Arcade. What motivated the need for partnership with an event management company like them, and how has that gone? What other lessons could you share with other event runners who might want to move that direction?
I get that question a lot. So we were in just Seattle. Seattle was our original show, our home show. Then we had done that for a number of years, and the discussion came up of whether we wanted to move to the East Coast. PAX was selling out in a matter of minutes every single year, and that interestingly is a problem. It's great that we're selling out our show, but now we have thousands of people who are angry because they can't get passes. Potentially people who have gone to every single PAX now suddenly can't get a badge, and we really didn't like letting people down, and we really didn't like that feeling of disappointment that not everybody who wanted to come to a PAX could come to a PAX. So that's essentially a problem that we needed to solve. And there's, as Robert was always very fond of saying, there's a few ways where you can sell that. When your supply doesn't meet your demand, how do you fix that problem? Well, you can increase supply. You can increase the price. Or you can decrease the quality of the show. Those were sort of decrease your demand, right? Basically,
yeah, decrease the demand.
This was like our little business 101 with Robert, and he's like, we can make the show worse, so less people will want to come. We can raise the prices of the show so that fewer people will be able to come, or we can make more show. And of those three options, the only one that really sounded appealing was, of course, make more show. So, all right, well, if we're going to do another show, a second PAX, let's try and do it on the opposite side of the country so that maybe, more people will have the opportunity to attend their first PAX. So that started us on this line. And I can't remember when the first Boston was. It was 2010, I think.
Yeah, 2010.
2010, yeah. Okay. And it was at the Heinz.
The Heinz
the original,
Center, yeah.
Originally at the Heinz Center. So in the around, I don't know, 2008 or 2009, we were like, okay, we're gonna do a show. Where do we want to do it? Let's do it in Boston. And at that point was like, okay, reality check. None of us at Penny Arcade are event management people. None of us. I mean, I wasn't. I had to go back to school to learn how to do it. We did it in Seattle just out of sort of sheer gumption and luck. But if we are going to talk about doing another show on the other side of the country, we're talking about a whole new ball of logistics. Like, well, how, stuff like drayage and shipping and, dealing with fire marshals and fire code and a whole new state with different rules and different union law. And it was very intimidating, the amount of new learning we would have to do. That isn't because keep in mind, this is not our full-time job. We're a media company trying to put on, a thrice weekly web strip. And at that time we were doing PATV and we were doing a whole bunch of other things as our full-time jobs. and then there was this show that was one weekend a year, except that it was taking so much time and effort to put it together that it just was a matter of time that we would have to find some professionals in the exhibition space. Reed International is huge. They're headquartered out of the UK. They run events worldwide. Everything from orthodontist conventions to pop culture shows to film festivals to if it is a consumer or trade show anywhere in the world, they've done it. So they were the number one people to approach if we're talking about adding another show. They happen to have a pop culture portfolio, Reed Pop. They do C2E2, they do New York City Comic Con, they do a bunch of Star Wars celebration stuff. So they already had a number of shows that were not exactly like PAX, but that maybe there would be some common language when we're talking about pop culture events. So they were our first choice, and luckily they were happy to work with us and want to help with like a gaming festival type show like PAX. So that was the original partnership between Reed Pop and Penny Arcade. And they helped us get into the Heinz, and we've been working together ever since. I know initially when PAX was partnered with Reed, acquired by Reed, I don't know what the right word to use is, but when we started working with them, right off the bat, fans are scared. They don't know what that means. They've been bought out. They've been taken over by a corporate entity. What does that mean? And sort of the best analogy that I figured to compare it to was like hiring a wedding planner. We're still doing the content of the show. We're still, putting together the panels and the games and all of the stuff that we loved to do as gamers at Penny Arcade without worrying about the drayage and the shipping and the hotel blocks and the nightmarish schedules and the fire marshal compliance and all of that really nasty, uninteresting, paperworky, bureaucracy bullshit was being handled by Reed. So it's like they were suddenly the PAX wedding planners. They were going to run around behind the scenes making sure that all of those little details were taken care of so that we could walk down the aisle and just enjoy our weekend. And I think that when you think of it that way, you're kind of like, oh, okay, so they're not going to change the flavor of PAX. They're just helping run it, which is exactly what the situation is. So initially, they had, like I said, at that time, the Reed Pop didn't have any other sort of gaming conventions, so there was a little bit of a learning curve for them. They'd done Comic-Con type shows before, but not gaming-related ones. But there was, like I said, enough common language that they were like, oh, okay, we think we kind of know what's going on, and it didn't take them very long to fully understand it all. And I working with them has been some of the best times of my professional career. They're really like siblings in arms in a lot of ways. We go into the trenches together for a few weeks a year, and we work long hours, and they help us in so many immeasurable ways be able to put on these shows. So I absolutely love them. Formed great relationships and working partnerships through them. So they're great.
I don't know of other shows that have grown as fast as PAX has. So other event managers I've talked to over the years haven't had some of the same issues to even have gone that direction.
Yeah,
so.
and there's absolutely no doubt that we never would have been able to expand even to Boston without their help. They have so many industry contacts. Like I said, it's greater than just Reed Pop, right? It's the whole Reed International organization behind them. But they have significant pull at every major hotel chain, at every convention center across the United States and the world. They have there's Reed Australia, there's Reed Europe, they have these satellite offices everywhere, and staff on the ground that know how to get stuff done in every city you could imagine. So, and working from city to city is very, very different. Going into Philadelphia has been, again, a whole, which is our latest new show that we just had the first one last fall. Again, absolutely entirely new learning curve for us. But the Reed people have got it. Like, they know it. They're doing another Comic-Con in Philadelphia, Keystone. This year is a new show that Reed Pop is doing in the same building that we do Unplugged. So they know the building, they know the space, they know the people. And it really takes a lot of the pressure off for us as event managers when you're working with an exhibition partner that has got it, right? When you have like a union crew chief talking to you about, minimums and hours, and our heads are just sort of spinning because we're not 100% clear on what they're talking about because we've never worked in that space before. the Reed people are like, it's okay, we got it, we know exactly what he's talking about, and they take care of things. So it's really reassuring for us, and we wouldn't have been able to do any of our expansions without them, for sure.
Are there further expansions planned?
Yeah. So basically, in terms of PAX, the core team that Penny Arcade has, we're tapped out. We're doing the 5 shows a year now, and that's I know we keep saying that, okay, well, 4 shows is it, 3 shows was it, but no, 5 really is it, I swear. We don't have the bandwidth to do any more directly ourselves. But now we're doing the Powered by PAX ideas. So Powered by PAX is a new brand, I guess is a way to say it, that Reed Pop is definitely leading on, and they've announced a show in China and then a show in Paris. So there's Powered by PAX Paris and Powered by PAX Guangzhou. Guangzhou was delayed. It was supposed to launch this year, but they had some problems with the venue in that the state needed the venue for the same weekend, so we lost it. But Paris, as far as I know, is going ahead, and they're going to be releasing more information about that later this month, I think. They've just announced it but haven't provided any details yet. But it's coming soon, and that's exciting. So basically what they're going to be doing is they're going to be sort of it's kind of like we've sort of provided them a PAX in a box. Like, here's how you do a PAX. And we've consulted really heavily with these Powered by PAX teams on how to capture the spirit and the culture of a PAX, and putting together a gaming festival in a really PAX spirit. With the idea of doing these international shows that we don't have the bandwidth to go and do ourselves, but we can certainly talk other teams through it. So it's going to be a cool combination of local teams following a PAX model, I guess is sort of how to describe it.
How well do you think the PAX culture itself will translate into these just very different culture that is China and that is France?
Well, and that's exactly why we need to do it this way. Yeah,
also.
Absolutely. Because that's you've hit the nail on the head. It's unreasonable for us to think that we could just waltz into, for example, China and put on a show our way and have it hit the same notes, right? Gamers talk a lot about the difference between Eastern and Western style gaming. It's very different. And it's almost like we're speaking a different language, right? But we have those different languages, but we also have, just the ways of thinking are completely different, and that translates to a different gaming style and a different emphasis on different things. So, it wasn't, even if we tried to do a PAX Guangzhou or a PAX Paris, I don't know that it would have worked, because we would come in with a very American viewpoint and a very firmly convinced that we knew what we were doing because we've been doing it for 15 years and this is how we do a PAX, but not realizing we weren't capturing those cultural differences and weren't really meeting them. So we have to adapt, and this would be a really high degree of adaptation required, right, to go into a very different climate and put on the same sort of show. So this is sort of the best of both worlds, because we're taking those PAX ideas of what we want the spirit of it to be like, but we're handing it over to local teams who, and they haven't shied from looking at what we're proposing and going, that's not going to work here. I'm sorry, that doesn't work. And then saying what does work, and then us saying, okay, yeah, we see what we're getting at, so how about if we did it this way? Specifically in terms of the staffing, because that's where my focus is. I mean, it's happened precisely in that way. When we were in San Antonio, the Powered by PAX Paris team had come out, and we were having meetings with them on site there in San Antonio. I went over sort of the hiring process that I use domestically with enforcers with them, and he's just shaking his head saying, well, that won't work here. Our labor laws are different. Here we pay people hourly. There they don't. They pay them flat rate by the day. So we were talking about things like doing half shifts, and he's like, sure, you could do a half shift, but you're going to pay him the same as if I'd paid him a full shift. So that's not going to work here. We're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's a valid problem, right? So, because specifically that was in reference to one of the things I really like to make sure with enforcers is that no one's working the whole time. And there are some shows that do that. They're incentivized to work more, and they never take breaks, and they never stop, and they work 3 shifts a day. And I think that that's very hard on people, and I think that it's difficult to form loyalty to a show if you don't actually get to experience the show, if you're so busy being run off your feet that you don't actually get to relax and have a good time. So with Enforcers, I want to make sure that, we run on 3 shifts a day, but everyone's only going to work 1. So then they have those other 2 shifts, 12 hours, to actually enjoy themselves and experience the show and see the things that they want to see. So I was talking about that to the Powered by PAX guy, and he's like, if I work them 6 hours or if I work them 10 hours, I pay them the same. So it, from a financial standpoint, doesn't really, it's hard to justify paying them for what they would consider a half-day shift. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that's a problem. So instead we talked about, well, if there's a 2-day show, have them work 1 day and not the next day. Maybe that works. So we're like, yeah, that was a good compromise. So rather than what we would do over here, which would be like, okay, you work half the day Saturday and half the day Sunday, and I pay you, 10 hours, they would have one person work Saturday and one person work Sunday, and then pay the first guy only 10 hours or whatever. So little things like that. That's obviously that's just labor law difference. It doesn't talk a lot about the gaming culture, but those sorts of things were coming up across the board. Just how their clubs are structured, their gaming clubs, their guilds, their clans, things like that. It's just there's a different mindset behind them than we have here. And it was really interesting to talk to them and see those differences and go, oh, that's really cool. That wouldn't happen here. We would have screwed it up if we tried to do it ourselves. So I'm very glad that there's local teams that are going to take the PAX banner and carry it and iterate it in their own way, and I think they'll be very successful.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I've definitely heard from the few Europeans I've met at a PAX are all just like, I wish I didn't have to come to the States to come to PAX, and now they'll have an opportunity with the Paris show. So that's really great.
Yeah, I think so, and I'm really excited about the Paris show. I say the Paris show specifically just because I spent more time talking to that team, but excited about the Powered by PAX Guangzhou show too. Like I think that these are going to be really great. I want them to succeed, and hopefully we'll see more. Like it would be, I would love a Powered by PAX somewhere in Africa or, there are so many options. And one in South America. We've got a lot of Brazilian gamers that come up, particularly for in San Antonio, and to give them a PAX of their own would be phenomenal. I would love that. Like a PAX of their own that they can do in their style would be just the coolest thing to see. I want to go see all of them.
Yeah, no, that's great. As part of my day job, I help run the Tableau conference. And so we have the big conference in the U.S. every year, but now we've also got these Tableau on tour shows where we have like a smaller one-day event in all these different regions to get that same thing, to have our customers have that experience. And in this case, your customer is the gaming community. And yeah, being able to provide that broadly must feel great.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I think in terms of what, the direction that PAX is taking, this is how we're expanding. Because, we're not expanding the domestic shows in the U.S. with our core team. We just can't. Our calendars are full. And this is a really great way to do it in a way that I think is going to retain the PAX flavor, but just be able to reach more people.
Thank you so much for your time, Kristin. Do you want people to be able to reach out to you, or?
Sure, I love talking to people. Yeah, the best way to reach me is probably on Twitter. I'm at Twitter at PRD if you spelled it out in letters, so PEEARDEE. Because just the acronym was taken, so I had to go with the spelling the letters out. But yeah, I'm really active on Twitter, and I love to talk to people. So if they have any questions or just want to say hi, welcome to reach out to me there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Jared. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Show notes are available at conventionalpodcast.com, and you can reach out to me on Twitter at conventionalpod or by email conventionalpodcast@gmail.com. There's also a feedback form on the website. Please reach out with comments or suggested guests. Thanks for listening.